Some of you may have visited my YouTube channel or glanced at the icon next to one of my videos and wondered just who in the heck is that inside that icon that I use for my profile. Well, in case you have pondered that question, let me enlighten you. That's Kamen Rider Wrath, one of my favorite characters from one of my recent favorite television shows, Kamen Rider Dragon Knight. Behind every mirror on the planet is a portal to Ventara, a planet that is identical to Earth, right down to the fact that every person on Earth has a twin on Ventara. The planet was invaded by an evil alien general called Xaviax, and to fight the aliens, 12 people were given advent decks that allowed them to transform into armored superheroes called Kamen Riders. But the Riders were betrayed by one of their own, and all of them were taken out except for Kamen Rider Wing Knight, who heads to Earth to stop Xaviax from conquering it as well. The protagonist of the series is a young man named Kid who finds one of the advent decks and becomes the new Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, and he teams up with Wing Knight to battle Xaviax's legions of mirror monsters and the newly recruited Earth Kamen Riders who are being tricked or manipulated into fighting for Xaviax. The first thing that made the show awesome was its kick-ass fight scenes. Every episode had a choreographed martial arts fight with the characters wielding kick-ass weapons, and the show was just fun as hell to watch. But the show wasn't all silly action. The show actually had a story, and a pretty good one at that. The characters weren't just two-dimensional archetypes beating each other senseless. Most of them were fleshed-out characters with genuine internal struggles and character arcs. These were actual people, characters that you could relate to and get attached to. Also, one of the things that blew my mind for a kids' TV show, they actually killed off characters. In fact, they killed off characters a lot. Poor Kamen Rider Camo was only in 2 episodes before he bit the dust. Fights weren't just fun to watch, they were tense because important characters could and would get killed at any time. I'll admit the show wasn't perfect, there were a few annoying characters and a few plot holes. The explanation for where Kamen Rider Onyx came from doesn't make any sense, but the show's good far outweighs the few nitpicks that I have. Honestly, the biggest problem the show had was that it was broadcast on 4Kids TV. Here's an idea. Let's take the critically acclaimed and hugely popular television show that's one of the few original shows we've got, and let's not broadcast the series finale on television. Let's force people to watch it online. This is why nobody likes you, 4Kids! Because you're stupid! And because you keep rebroadcasting episodes of Sonic X that weren't very good in the first place. Sadly, Kamen Rider Dragon Knight wasn't the marketing smash hit that Power Rangers or Yu-Gi-Oh! Were. Bandai released a few toys that I've heard are fairly poor quality, and that's about it. The series isn't getting released on DVD, even though if it were, I'd buy it in a heartbeat. The only things I've got to remember the series by are this kick-ass Kamen Rider Axe figure that I ordered from Japan, and the video games released for the Wii and Nintendo DS. I won't be reviewing the Nintendo DS game because I have no idea how to capture footage off a DS, but the Wii game I'll tell you all about. So here are the basic powers of Kamen Riders that the game has to work with. Each rider has an advent deck that they use to transform. They draw cards from this deck and scan them into a piece of their armor to equip themselves with weapons. Each rider has a contract beast that provides them with these weapons and can be summoned to assist them in battle. The game has 2 gameplay modes, Arcade and Mirror World, and you start with 6 characters unlocked. So the first thing I did when I started up the game, I went to the Arcade mode. I picked Wing Knight as my character because Axe and Wrath don't come unlocked, and I set the difficulty to easy because I'm not typically very good at fighting games. So I start the game, and where are my advent cards? How come the only card I have is Final Vent? What gives? Yeah, you need to unlock your advent cards. You start out with nothing except your rider's finishing move. All of your Kamen Rider's other special powers, their weapons and their special abilities, you have to unlock. And it takes a long time to unlock them all. Not like you need your advent cards on the easy difficulty anyway. The game seems to think that playing on easy means that the player is mentally handicapped. The opponents barely move on this difficulty. You don't even have to try to kick their asses. My recorder has a delay between pressing a button and having something happen on screen, and I still finished this fight without getting hit. That is sad. And my god, Wing Knight looks like crap. His coloring is so pixelated that it looks like he stepped out of a Nintendo 64 game, and the shading is so gaudy. It's worth mentioning that Kamen Rider Dragon Knight is an independently developed game, and it doesn't exactly have the best graphics that money can buy. The shading of each character is painted onto each fighter's character model, and the shading of each character never changes. If one part of a character's armor is a certain color and shade, it's always that color and shade. Most of the riders look presentable. Their joints tend to blend together, and Thrust's horn is rotated about 60 degrees from what it's supposed to be, but most of the characters look fine. The only characters that really look bad to me are Wing Knight, Strike, and Survive Mode Wing Knight. Strike has too many bright streaks on his armor like Wing Knight does, and his head is a little too small, and Survive Mode Wing Knight's head isn't attached to his body. Look at it! There's a gap between his head and his neck! How do you miss that? I'm not the kind of guy who bitches about graphics. Visuals aren't as important to me as a well-designed game, but Weeknight and Strike just look ugly. The show killed off old writers and introduced new ones all the time, and the only characters that were present through the whole show were Dragon Knight, Weeknight, and Strike. If they're going to screw up the look of two of the characters, could they not screw up two of the three main characters that were there the whole time? And slight nitpick, how come Kamen Rider Axe, the guy who carries around a giant axe, never actually fights people using his axe in this game? I mean, you've got a giant bladed weapon always on your person, and you're not going to hit shit with it? Also, while I'm bitching about the game's presentation, the voice actors that they got for each character mostly don't even resemble the characters from the show. Dragon Knight, Siren, and Wrath sound a lot like the show's actors, but the rest of the voices are not even close. So my first impression of the game was pretty bad, what with the brain-dead AI and no special abilities for my characters and my character looking like shit, but once I cranked the difficulty up to normal and unlocked a few advent cards for my writers, the game became much more enjoyable. You unlock each character's advent cards by playing Mirror World, which is basically the game's story mode, but playing Mirror World does not unlock cards for the character you're using, it unlocks cards for the characters that you defeat. So playing the Mirror World as, for example, Dragon Knight, basically levels up all of your characters except for Dragon Knight. It's weird. Well, this is a fighting game, I suppose that I should actually talk about the fighting. You use A and B for weak and strong attacks, respectively. There aren't any combos that use both buttons, but there are different combos if you're moving the control stick in a certain direction. The ultra-simplified controls probably would turn off a fighting game veterans, but I'll take a simple control scheme that's easy to use and easy to learn over the bulk of fighting games like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, where the controls for normal attacks are like entering cheat codes. There's nothing that turns me off a fighting game faster than batshit controls. Also, unlike Street Fighter and the games that rip it off, you can't just block the entire time and become immune to damage. Seriously, who thought that was a good idea? As you dish out and take damage, your Advent gauge at the bottom of the screen fills up. You can use your Advent gauge to use Advent cards, summon your Advent beast, or to perform an attack cancel. If you're in the middle of launching attacks, you can press the Z button and use a little of your Advent gauge to immediately end whatever attack you're using and launch a new attack, basically starting a brand new combo in the middle of your old one. It's a really neat system that I've never seen before, and using this ability to string together combos is vital in this game. One of the biggest sins that a fighting game can commit in my mind is to have a roster of characters that are all functionally the same. I'm looking at you, Mortal Kombat! Each of Kamen Rider Dragon Knight's fighters play and feel unique. Incisor has the strongest Advent Beast, Thrust can wear down an enemy's guard really quickly, and he has a lot of close range attacks. Strike has 3 Advent Beasts to play with, and he can combine them into a 4th beast, and so on. And that's not even considering the wildly different cards at each character's disposal, different weapons, some have shields, and the different Advent Beasts at each rider's command that do different things when summoned. One of my favorite characters to use is Camo, because Camo can transform into a clone of his opponent, he can turn invisible, his Advent Beast lassos his opponent when it attacks, and his Hold Vent has a ridiculously long range. Who would have thought that a yo-yo could do so much damage? Yeah, the other riders get swords or giant spiky gauntlets for weapons. Camo gets a yo-yo. I told you this guy got the shaft in the series. Come to think of it, we never got to see Camo's final vent in the TV show. Let's check it out. Ooh, man, that had to suck. Let's see it again. Yeah! Like I said, the two main gameplay modes are Arcade Mode and Mirror World. At the end of Arcade Mode, you fight Xaviax, and before you ask, no, you cannot play as Xaviax, and you can't transform into him with Camo. Every time that you fight Xaviax, he has the moves, cards, and Advent Beast of one of the game's riders selected at random, so instead of fighting Xaviax as the end boss, you're basically just fighting another rider with a new skin so that you can't tell who it is. I sincerely hope that this was due to the game's budget constraints and they didn't not design a final boss on purpose, because this would be like getting to the end of Super Mario Bros. And then finding out the final boss is a Goomba. Speaking of budgetary constraints, this game has the same engine and same levels as the Japanese game Kamen Rider Climax Heroes, which explains why there's a church level, and why Kamen Rider Decade music plays in one of the levels. This game is basically just a reskin of another game, and sadly, that's not the only place where budget bit this game in the ass. In Mirror World, you're taken to a board with several spaces with missions. Each mission either has you fighting a Kamen Rider with some special rules, or you have to take down a group of mirror monsters. There were a ton of mirror monsters in the show. There were shield monsters, shark monsters, giant spider monsters. The only monsters that appear in the game are red minions and blue minions. the two basic monsters that have no special powers. These missions are just basic beat-em-up levels against basic goons, and these missions have a tendency to get repetitive. Sometimes these missions are fun, but there are times when it just gets monotonous, punching the same two guys in the face over and over and over again. You guys seriously couldn't afford a few more monsters? I guess I shouldn't be surprised they couldn't afford to attach Survive Mode Wing Knight's head to the rest of his body. Hey engineer, do you have some spare neck that you could use to fill in that gap under Wing Knight's head?
Nope.
Oh, and what really cheesed me off when I started this game, some of the duels with other Kamen Riders tell you that you need to perform an Advent Guard to succeed in the mission, and the game never explains what the hell an Advent Guard is. And the instruction booklet, it's 2 pages long. It doesn't tell you either. But Mirror World is actually the most disappointing thing about this game. Mirror World is the story mode of the game. It's the only single-player mode aside from arcade mode, and all it is, you see a text crawl giving your riders backstory, rewritten so that they're all good guys, you fight some guys, and then you see another text crawl. It takes about half an hour to beat, and the missions are just a few sets of special rules and basic fights against basic goons. Kamen Rider Dragon Knight was a series that had an emphasis on story, one that had a continuous and well thought out story from beginning to end. I was expecting a big epic story mode, or at least some kind of story that progresses as you go along, and this is what we got. 2 text scrolls and a half hour of punching goons in the face. That's the only gameplay mode you get aside from arcade mode. And I know that you can't rewrite the entire Mirror World for one character, but Wrath is the main villain of the show, the one writer who isn't rewritten as a good guy in the game. Do you mind explaining why Wrath is beating up his own soldiers? But probably the biggest problem with the game is that it has balancing issues the likes of which I've never seen. Ask pretty much anybody who owns this game who the weakest character is, and I guarantee they'll all say Kamen Rider Sting. Almost all of Sting's attacks take a second or two before they actually hit, which means that if you fight somebody at really close range, which kind of happens a lot in fighting games, you're screwed. Sting has 2 really good Advent cards, Swing Vent and Copy Vent, but Swing Vent takes a really long time to attack, and Copy Vent is super strong, but it takes a second or two to activate, again leaving you open to attack. And Sting's Advent Beast deals decent damage, but it's so short that you can just jump over it. You name it, Sting probably sucks at it. On the other end of the spectrum, let's just say that if you're playing a friend in this game and your friend selects Kamen Rider Torque as their character, you're officially allowed to reach over and slap them across the face. Everybody loved Torque in the show. He was a rebel who didn't play by the rules. He had an arsenal of guns for his weapons. I hated Torque in the show. The guy was an asshole. And now I have a whole new reason to hate that little bastard. Every time you press the strong attack button, Torque fires his gun at his opponent. He fires way too quickly to reliably dodge, his gun doesn't run on ammo or overheat. If you're playing as Torque, all you have to do is mash the B button and Torque will fire a never-ending barrage of bullets at the enemy and pretty much automatically win. The computer is helpless, they can't do anything to stop it. And what's worse is I think the game's developers figured out that Torque is overpowered, and they tried to balance him out by making the rest of his attacks total crapola. His weak attacks suck, his Advent Beast doesn't deal much damage, and his cards, though fun to play with, are much less effective than just using his standard gun. Pretty much the only effective way to use Torque is to be a cheating bastard. It isn't even fun to use Torque because all you do is mash one button and win. I know it'll make me feel better about Torque though. Ah, that never gets old. But believe it or not, Torque is not the most overpowered character in the game. No, that honor belongs to Kamen Rider Wrath. Wrath might just be the most broken, the most overpowered character that I have ever seen in a fighting game. And when your competition for that title is a jackoff that runs around shooting people in the face and a melee fighter, that's saying a lot. Wrath's sword vent is very fast, deals a ton of damage, and can easily chain together several attacks at a time. Although why Wrath's sword vent gives him 1 sword in this game when it gave him 2 swords in the show is beyond me. Wrath teleports instead of running or sidestepping, and if you abuse this ability, Wrath becomes nearly impossible to hit. But by far the worst is that Wrath has a card called Time Vent that immediately restores Wrath to full health. Wrath doesn't get weakened in any way, your opponent doesn't get a power boost, there is no repercussion for this. Wrath just immediately gets all of his health back. And needless to say that unless the guy using Wrath really sucks or he's fighting a fighting game god, nobody is going to come back and win after Wrath pulls Time Vent. You know what? Wrath might be the most overpowered character in the game by far, but it is so much fun to play as him. See, the difference between Wrath and Torque is that you have to put actual effort into playing as Wrath to take advantage of his overpoweredness. He's powerful, but you actually have to put in some effort while you're using him, as opposed to Torque where you just press one button. And the thing is, I can't really complain about the characters in the game being horribly unbalanced because the unbalances are all true to the series. In the show, Torque was only powerful because he had his guns to hide behind. He couldn't fight worth crap, and the game captures that perfectly. Wrath is the most broken fighter because he's Xaviax possessing a rider's body. He's supposed to be far and away the strongest fighter. Of course Sting is the weakest fighter. In the show, he had asthma, and his character arc was about learning to work with and accept his disability. That's why I can't really blame this game for its hideously unbalanced roster, because its roster is unbalanced on purpose in the name of staying true to the show. And honestly, Sting, Wrath, and Torque aside, the game's other 12 fighters are all pretty evenly matched. It's just that this game only has 15 characters, so having 3 unbalanced characters is kind of a lot. So to review this review, the game has a small roster, 2 short gameplay modes, horrendous balancing, repetitive missions, and you can see most of what the game has to offer over the course of an afternoon or two. And I still love it, because the game gets right the one thing that it needs to get right. It's fun. The combat is fast and furious, the controls are intuitive, and the characters have plenty of variety. That's all a fighting game needs. Yeah, the story mode is kind of underwhelming, but you know what? This was a budget title. I'll take what I can get. This is a game that I pop in and play to kill a half an hour or two every now and then, and I have a blast every time that I do it. So what if the game doesn't have as much content as Mortal Kombat? So what if the game has some ugly graphics and a small roster? When I play this game, I have fun, damn it! And that's the only justification I need. This game isn't everybody's cup of tea, but I enjoy it, and if you got a problem with that, tough cookies.